Hello everyone, welcome back to Powerful Nothing and Magic the Gathering Cube podcast. I'm your host Dan, and as always, I'm joined by James. James, the podcast has turned 100. How are you feeling?
Yeah, it's centenary week. It's an exciting time. It's helping me cope with my sense of grief for England's World Cup exit. We go onwards. We continue 4 more years of podcasting. 4 more years of hurt. It's all good times.
Oh no, we don't need to wait 4 more years. I have a good feeling about the Lionesses bringing it home next year. But anyway, James, this is a Cube podcast. Let's talk about Cube. So yeah, because this is our 100th episode, we wanted to look back in some way. What we thought would be fun is, what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be looking back at my Cube as it was when we started the podcast. We found in Cube Cobra, we have found the list from when we started, and there are some questionable tests there, shall we say. Basically, James is going to be ripping and roasting me for some of those choices, and I'm going to try and defend it as best I can. Before we get into that episode, as always, there will be a card gallery down in the show notes below if you want to have a look at the cards that we're talking about, as well as a link to the YouTube version if you want to see the pretty pictures move around the screen. While you're down there, please consider giving the podcast a 5-star review, thumbs up, tell a friend, all that good stuff. In the show notes as well, there will also be a link to our new Substack that we've recently launched. We don't really have a full schedule planned for this yet. It's basically going to be, if we think there's something interesting that we want to write about, we're going to put it in the Substack. Some things are better written than they are talked about on a podcast. I recently released an article kind of going over the cube skeleton that we did a few episodes ago, just in a bit more detail for everyone's benefit. So check that out if you think it would be helpful for you. All right, let's move it back to episode 100. So a link to the current version of my cube and to the old version will be down in the show notes below as well. So in our first couple of episodes, so I think it's best if we first place where the cube is in terms of the timeline of Magic. So our first episode came out on May 4th, 2023, and our first 2 episodes were set reviews for March of Machines. So those were the most recent sets at the time. In context, in terms of Magic, this is a few months before the Lord of the Rings set came out, which, as we remember, was a modern legal set. And obviously, this is about 6 months or so before Modern Horizons 3 came out. So we're kind of in this area of where the initiative in Cube exists. That's super powerful, but we don't have this kind of influx of just really stupidly powerful one-off cards. I think Gut had been printed at this point, but Broadside Bombardiers is 6 months away, that kind of thing. So kind of we're at this point where the power level of Cube is getting really quite high, but we haven't been fully overtaken by just individually powerful cards yet. In terms of the power level of my Cube, it's also in a bit of a weird spot. We have the full wheel deck in my Cube, we have Shieldred in, we have all the wheels. We don't have Bowmaster yet, but when it gets printed in a couple of months, it does come in. And as I touched on, we also do have the full initiative package. And by that, I mean we're running every rare card that has initiative, including is it Savrok's Tomb? The artifact that has initiative as well. In this cube as well at the time, we also have cards like Minsk and Boo, we have Comet Stellar Pup, we have the full Reanimator package, we have things like Archon of Cruelty, we have Grizzlebrand, we have Atraxa, and a couple of notable combos. In terms of cube as well, of my 540 cube, about 300 cards are the same. And one thing I did notice when I was checking out the comparison is that the curve, I've done a big rebuild of my cube recently, and even in 2023, the curve is noticeably higher. It's noticeably a thicker curve, as it were. And James, I want to throw this to you because kind of from your end, we were cubing a lot of this cube at the time, because at this point in our history, this was the only cube around. This is before you built your cube. This is before I built my 2nd, 3rd, and 4th and 5th cube and all that kind of stuff. What do you remember of this cube at the time when we first launched the podcast?
Yeah, so I think it was in a slightly weird spot at this point where the initiative was in, but I think the initiative hadn't been around that long at this point. And we were all still coming to grips with just how powerful the initiative was. And when a cube has as much initiative in as this one does, as you say, we've got kind of all of them, and that means it's going to crop up in loads of games. And it puts this weird limitation on actually the sort of decks you can build. You really can't play attrition-y, removal-y control decks that can't take the initiative back, because you can kill all their creatures and it doesn't matter because they just have the initiative and they go round and round and you never take it back and then you die. It's why the initiative is different from Monarchy, right? Like, you can win those games where your opponent has the Monarch. You can't win those games where your opponent has the initiative. So I think it was in a weird place from that point of view. But I will say, I don't think it's a horrible thing, because, like, it would be a bad thing if it was in that state for, like, 2 years and we were playing it every week, you know? Like, we'd all get really bored. But it is kind of fun when those busted new mechanics come out. Like, you just go on a little bit of a journey where everyone figures out, like, there's actually a sort of metagame shift, right? In the way how that happens with constructed formats, right? Like, despite our best predictions, for example, Vintage very broken at the moment by the Fantastic Car.
What do you mean? I called that.
Yeah. By R, I mean mine.
Good. Yeah. Good.
I still maintain it's not that good in Cube, but
apparently it's a doomsday backup win condition now. Like,
yeah.
James, that's
do you know what the
wild
deck's
to me.
Called?
No, what is it? Tell me.
Doomsday.
Marvelous. Okay.
Really good. Yeah. The Vintage is really broken at the moment by that card, and it's like, on the one hand, that would be really annoying if you were like going to a paper tournament and you know, obviously you're not going to want to buy all the cards to play the best Fantastic Card deck or whatever. But if you're just messing around online, then it's quite fun to go on this little journey and figure out what the new metagame looks like when it's all like Fantastic Cards versus the Disenchant Force and Collect Roofs, right? And in a similar way, it's like interesting to see what happens when the cube goes through this really big shift and everyone's figuring out like what actually wins in the world where you have initiative appearing in 50% of the games. So I think it's like fine to put it in for a bit and then probably a good idea to cut it after a while, you know?
Yeah, exactly, as well. Kind of like, also, like, I think like what I'm aiming for the cube has definitely changed between when we started the podcast and like how the cube list is now. At the time when we started the podcast, I effectively was trying to make this cube as powerful as possible. Like this is an unpowered cube. It's always been an unpowered vintage cube. But apart from the fast mana, like the cards in the cube at the time were like the most powerful cards. It was pushing all the broken things that Vintage Cube was trying to do, but also with full initiative and that kind of stuff. So, like, there's a world where kind of like if you took a deck from a powered Vintage Cube and this cube, like the decks would look very similar.
Yeah, for sure. If you took a powered cube, removed the power 9 plus like solving and whatnot, and compared it to this cube would probably be more powerful than most of them, I would suggest. The power level is super high, and it's it does put some limitations on what the other packages you can support are, and I feel like that hasn't been fully acknowledged in our design here.
I'm just looking at the first thing I need to talk about today, and Jesus Christ, like the power level of this stuff is... This is something I think that we might come back to at the end, but I think it's worth saying that like the power level of this cube definitely limited the ability for us to test some of the packages and some of the cards that we're going to be talking about today. I think it's something I've definitely learned more as a cube builder as I've kind of continued my journey, as kind of like I've spent more time building cubes and building different cubes. It's just like being better at finding that balance of power a bit more. And just when you're trying to push things as high as you can, you really can't test things like let's talk about the attraction package that I was testing when we started the podcast. So in the cube, I was running a card called Deadbeat Attendant. This card is 1 and a black for a creature vampire employee. It is a 1/1, and when it enters, you open an attraction. Now, this is a card from Unfinity, and in that draft format, you drafted an attraction deck. I wasn't doing the draft and attraction deck. Basically, if you drafted Deadbeat Attendant, I gave you a 10-card attraction deck. And like what opening an attraction means is basically you take a card from that deck and you put it onto the battlefield. And like all the attractions are like little artifacts that give you like a little incremental bit of value. They like all had an effect, and basically at a point on your turn they would make you roll a dice, and if you rolled the numbers highlighted on the attraction, you would get that effect. So like a good example is a card like Ferris Wheel. This is an artifact attraction with Visit. It says choose target creature that hasn't been phased out with this attraction. That creature phases out until you roll a 3 or less while rolling to visit your attractions. And like once a turn, you would roll the dice, and on this one on the screen now, it shows a 4, 5, or 6. If you roll a 4, 5, or 6, you would visit that attraction and get this effect. I think it's worth saying very quickly that we knew this didn't work. Like normally I'm very hot on, if you test something in your cube, you need to give it time to breathe. You need to make sure that people get the chance to do it fully. This lasted one draft. This did so badly. This lasted one draft. Like, and I think probably the most egregious thing about this test is I cut Sword of Fire and Ice for Deadbeat Attendant. James, thoughts on that?
Yeah, this seems horrendous, to be honest. Like, do I have to draft the attractions?
No. I gave like a whole 10-card deck for it.
Okay, you just give me an attraction deck after the draft?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think there's a few reasons why this is terrible. Like, firstly, it's like I sit down to a draft. It's like, oh yeah, here's a cube. I've not looked at the changes because I probably didn't look at the changes. I just sat down and I opened my pack, and then I see Deadbeat Attendant, and now I have to ask you what an attraction is. Most likely, I think more than 50% of the group probably, there's a good chance they wouldn't know what an attraction did, right? So then you have to explain what an attraction is in the draft and how it works, and that I get the deck of attractions for free. That's all like non-obvious, and even then, right, unless I actually go and look through that deck of attractions mid-draft or before the draft, I don't really know how good the Deadbeat Attendant is, right? And even then, it's it's a very unfamiliar mechanic with the dice rolling and stuff. And not that you can't do any of that stuff, but it's like a big new cognitive load for the draft, right? And it's like, you're taking my time and mental energy to look at this thing and decide whether I want Deadbeat Attendant. And I feel slightly betrayed when then it's a fucking Deadbeat Attendant and it's terrible. And it's kind of like you've just wasted my mental energy by reading all this nonsense about a Ferris wheel, and obviously I'm going to take the Minskin Boo or whatever instead, because Deadbeat Attendant is not a card that belongs in a Minskin Boo format. Like, I think there's a cube you could do this in. It's not like an inherently bad thing, but it's an inherently bad thing for what is basically a powered cube.
Yeah, no, I would agree. So, like, I think this doesn't work on a couple of levels. So, kind of like, why it went into my cube is like I was starting to try and support like the Aristocrat style of deck where like you're putting artifacts into play, you're sacking them for value. Like in theory, this gives you something to sack to a Goblin Welder or something to sack for value away. Like the mental load part for me, I think is the most prevalent because like this is my one test of ever adding a sub deck to a cube. Like we've seen it a bunch on like Arena with cards like with the spell books, that kind of stuff. But like this is the first time I've ever added something like that. Like this is why I've never added cards like Oracle of the Alpha or anything like that kind of adds like the arena only mechanics to like a paper cube, because like this does work in like a similar way. And yeah, like yes, you can support it, but you can't really support it that much, because I was like thinking like, what happens if I add a second attraction creature that opens an attraction? And like, well, then I need 2 decks, because what happens if they're drafted by different players? And then it becomes like a massive, like a real unbelievable pain. And yeah, like the extra mental workload and like was very prevalent from the start, and it's like this was my one time testing it, and like I've never tried it again. The juice was never really worth the squeeze with this.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's always worth thinking about with this stuff, right? Like, what is the group that you're designing your cube for? And for our group, it's like everyone has played loads of Magic. They're all like pretty good Magic players. That doesn't mean we're all going to know what an attraction does because it came out like last week or whatever, and it's all nonsense and it's not in any real formats. And I'm generally quite reluctant to put in cards where reading the card does not explain the card.
Yes, I completely agree.
And reading Deadbeat Attendant tells you very little about Deadbeat Attendant, you know?
Yeah, no, you're really correct. Like, reading this card, like, it doesn't even give you a signal, like, on the card that it's for an artifact deck. And I think that, like, yeah, like, on everything else, I can completely agree. It's something that I've learned. I think, and, like, there's a world where this stuff can be cool, but, like, in that world, like, you actually draft the attractions as well. I think that's how you actually make it work, and I think that's more interesting rather than just having a one-off card that kind of just confuses things. And yeah, the fact that this is in a cube with a card like Minsk and Boo is kind of egregious. Like, we can just be doing more powerful things. A potentially more powerful thing is a card that we were recently testing at this time, and that was Auriok Salvagers. This is 3 and a white for a creature human soldier. It is a 2/4, and it has the activated ability for 1 and a white, return target artifact with mana value 1 or less from your graveyard to your hand. So this card has seen play in a bunch of high-powered cubes because it goes infinite with cards like Black Lotus. Now, obviously, Black Lotus wasn't in this cube at the time, but we did have Lion's Eye Diamond. So this is an infinite mana combo with Lion's Eye Diamond. I think why this got cut around this period of time is that it was a bit too niche. Like, I generally found the deck really didn't come together that much in this cube. Like, I wasn't really running any tutors at this time, and I think 2-card combos like that kind of struggle. And this is also before the time where we kind of really worked out what the best thing to do with Lion's Eye Diamond was, and effectively, like, we now know it's Underworld Breach, like Brain Freeze combo.
I quite like the Salvagers combo, actually. I mean, it's not one that's going to get played, you know, every single draft by any means, but it's kind of one of those where it's just one slot, you know, because you already have all the other cards that you want for that combo in here, right? So normally the combo, right, is you have Auriok Salvager's Lion's Eye Diamond is infinite mana, because you keep discarding your hand, you make 3 white mana, you pay 2 of it to return it. It's infinite mana of any color. But you have no cards in hand, so you need a way to go through your deck. And that looks like Ether Spellbomb, Pyrite Spellbomb, Chromatic Star, Chromatic Sphere. All these cards draw you your deck in that spot with infinite mana. And then you need a win condition. Pyrite Spellbomb above mentioned is kind of the easiest, but something like Walking Blister also works. And you already have all of these cards in, right? So it is literally just one slot for Auriok Salvagers that you're asking for. And, like, sure, a bunch of drafts it won't get paid, but the ones where it does, it's like this completely new deck, right? It's a very unique thing. And I feel like that is powerful when it comes together. Like, it doesn't come together very often, but when it does, it's really powerful and it's cool. So I think for that reason, I kind of like it, but I will say it is a little bit better in stuff like powered cubes, just because you have a little bit of redundancy, because there's Lotus as well as Diamond, and obviously in here it's just Diamond. But no, I do genuinely like the Salvagers combo. I have it in my powered cube. Honestly, the only reason it isn't in, like, the Modo cube or the Arena cube, for example, is just that it's very long to execute on Magic Online.
Right, yeah, tracks, yeah. It's a lot of clicking, but yeah.
Exactly. Whereas obviously in paper, you know, you just say, I now have infinite mana, and that's much nicer than spending 20 minutes of your life.
May I demonstrate my loop? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that tracks. Yeah, and also I think, like, maybe there's a world where it could come back into my cube now. Maybe for, like, super powered, maybe still for high power level cubes. I'm not sure, like, personally about it, just because the Mitgo Vintage Cube and that kind of stuff, like there's just so much creature removal now. Whereas in mine, because I brought the power level down, like in the current version, there's a world where this could actually come in and, like, could do quite well. Another card that I want to shout out that I was testing, another niche one, similar to the Deadbeat Attendant style of thing, and in that it was from Unfinity, it's a card called Trigger Happy. This is 1 and a red for an instant that says choose a triggered ability of target permanent. It triggers, you control that ability. So for what it's worth, if this had been printed back in the day, this would have been a silver bordered card. Technically not tournament legal, commander legal, that kind of stuff. But it's Cube, we can do what we want. The reason why I was testing it is that primarily as a way of trying to push Dark Depths. Now, this is very much like the peak of me going, like, how can I get Dark Depths to work? I like Dark Depths, it's cool. What can I do to push it? Turns out the solution in 2026 is just to cut Dark Depths. But Trigger Happy is an interesting one because it lets you, for 2 mana, like, to activate your Dark Depths and make the 2020 squiggly fish. This is what a card that I don't think we actually kind of fully, like, activating an ability or triggering an ability is a very unique thing to do, but, like, it went in for Dark Depths and it never really came off. Like James, do you remember ever seeing this card, like, activating a Dark Depths when I had it in my cube?
No, I don't think I ever saw that spell go on the stack. I like the idea in that it's one of those cards where you put it in your deck for Dark Depths, but some other kind of fun stuff will happen with it. And I enjoy cards like that. But I think we have now all just accepted that Dark Depths is a trap, right? It's the thing is, the 2020 Indestructible is kind of too beatable, actually. There's enough bounce, enough exile that it's all a bit tough. I also don't like that we didn't have Sylvan Safekeeper here because I think that's actually quite an important card for the depth stuff if you're going to try and make it work. Plus is also a really important piece for Titania, which is in the cube. But yeah, I think I appreciate we were trying with Dark Depths. It's a cool card. I wish it worked. It's actually just bad, I think.
Yeah, I do agree. And kind of like in this kind of weird point in cube where kind of like we hadn't really locked in on like what green is really looking like. It's kind of like in this cube, it's all over the place. Like we're kind of at the tail end of like, we know mono green isn't really good enough, but we don't really know what comes next. And like, we don't have the redundancy of like the Baloth Prime to really kind of push the Landsy style deck. But there's a world where like in 2023, one of the better things to be doing is like leaning into like Titania and like fast bond stuff, and like maybe that's what we should have been pushing at this time rather than like focusing on the Dark Depth style of lands deck. But yeah, either way, I do think Trigger Happy is an interesting card, and I just don't think my cube at the time was the right home for it. But yeah, maybe it's one I look at in the future if I can think of some more cool things to do with it. Another change I want to talk about. This was quite a big one, actually, because for a long time, I was really trying to push, like, humans in this cube. Like, we just recently cut, when we started the podcast, like, cards like Champion of the Parish and Tharly's Attendant. These are kind of, like, humans payoffs. Along with a card like Torrent's Fist of Angels. This is one that it, like, makes you humans when you cast creature spells. The reason for that is because also before we started the podcast, I also just cut my werewolf package, and that's something I really wanted to make work. Like I pushed that for ages, but it just really ended up like no one really started drafting it. Like I thought it was cool because like my goal was kind of like Naya is kind of doing humans, but like Selesnya specifically is pushing the humans. Gruul is pushing werewolves. You kind of have cards like Mayor of Averbrook as like a overlap card for both decks. I thought it was quite cool. But I think like the biggest issue at this time is like, why would someone draft like Tolliver, like a werewolf lord, when you can just draft the Minsk and Boo? And I think that's kind of the biggest issue with this deck at the time.
Yeah, it's just the thing, right, where the cards that require you to build around them to be good aggro cards, when you get there, they need to be better than the cards that don't need building around, right? And Tovolar in the best possible Tovolar deck you could have built in this cube is still worse than Minsk and Boo. So why are you going to bother, right? Like, Thalia's Lieutenant can't be better than White Plume Adventurer. You can't construct the deck where that happens, right? So they all end up not being worth the effort, is the thing.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this is probably the most obvious example of me not understanding the power level of cube at the time. Like, I think you can't push the ceiling of a cube in terms of power level without raising the floor. They have to kind of go up in unison. You can't have these super powerful cards and super weak cards in the same cube because, like, if I'm honest with you, it wasn't even that people weren't like they weren't like playing the humans and werewolf packages and decks and they were losing with them. It's just like they weren't ever playing with them, and that is like a really bad thing that like it had to be addressed, and that's kind of why they got cut.
Yeah, I mean, as we said, right, our group has played a lot of Magic. If it's not coming together, they're not going to force it in. They'll acknowledge that these other cards are just better, and let's play the good cards.
I mean, I will play them, and I will go 0-3. But yeah, that's kind of the curse of the cube designer, I guess. One other big cut that came around this time as well that we started the podcast was that this was the last time that I had Aristocrats fully supported in my cube. They got cut around the time of this podcast, and they've never really come back in any large density. Like at the time, this is effectively what like Mardu was doing in my cube. Like basically, Orzhov was a more control-y Aristocrats. Rakdos was like quite an aggressive Aristocrat deck, kind of like, and Boris was built around like a token-style strategy. And then because all these sacrifice outlets came out at this time as well, this was also the last time I tested persist combos in any great density in my cube as well. Like, I think we're both on the same kind of wavelength in terms of like persist combos aren't really what cubes are about, like what high-powered cubes are about nowadays. It's just a bit too slow and requires too many pieces. But like, I have added a touch more aristocratic bits. Like, it's not an archetype, but like I've added like a blood artist back in just because like in cube nowadays there's so many things dying, and just like having a little bit of reach for aggro decks or for like decks that where things die, I think is quite nice. But specifically with Aristocrats, James, kind of like is it like a deck you miss, or do you think it kind of like it got cut like when it should have, basically?
Yeah, I think a lot of the same arguments apply for Aristocrats as stuff like humans, where it's you just need a lot to go right. And when you've got cards like, like Parallax Wave, for example, is in this cube, right? Aristocrats requires this like critical mass of stuff on board, right? And it requires your stuff to be sticking, and you need to play like quite a big game with Aristocrats. It's not great in these like low resourcey things where everything's trading off a lot, because you just don't have that board state that you need to really pop off. And it's not great in you're giving up individual power level on your cards for synergies that come together in a very situational way. And I think it's not that it can't be strong in the right cube, but you have to really sculpt an environment for decks like that to be really viable. And I think that's not what we're doing in this cube, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like at this point in my cube, we're trying to go as powerful as possible, and like at least in this time period anyway, Aristocrats wasn't getting there, and like that. The power level kind of conversation is something that I've really looked at in the last couple of years. Like for me, I want some level of synergy decks to exist. I like it when like A plus B equals C is better than just A and B individually. Like I use that kind of like analogy all the time, but like I like it when someone doing something cool is better than someone just playing a card. So that's why in my cube now, like the modern version, the 2026 version, has way less of those just like individual power outliers. It's got cards that when you combine them are better, and like the way I've been able to do that is by cutting just the raw power level of cards. That's something in 2023 I hadn't worked out how to do yet. I was trying to have all these powerful individual cards plus synergy, and just like I hadn't really balanced it at all. Talking of not really balancing like a synergy deck, another one that kind of like was in this constant state of flux around this time is the Madness package. So at the time of the podcast, I think I just made the change to move away from specifically a dedicated Madness deck. So we just cut cards like Noose Constrictor, Wild Mongrel, Lothless Troll, Rakdos Headliner. These are all cards that like let you discard cards for free, and then like a bunch of powerful Madness cards like Bloodhall Priest, Shadow Grange, Archfiend, and also like Hollow One was in. That also just got cut. But yeah, I was really spent ages trying to work out what this deck is. I think it's in a better place now in 2026, but like at this time, there's so much faffing around. Like I cut a bunch of the Madness cards, but I'm still running both Reckless Worm and Arrogant Worm. I can tell in myself. I can look back and say that may have been a mistake, James. But like from your end anyway, what did you think of the Madness deck at the time, and what do you think the main issues were with it?
Yeah, it's pretty tough. The Madness deck, or Madness cards, I think, are in a much better place now than they were then, because we were missing a lot of the really powerful discard matters stuff that we now have in Red. Just wasn't around at the time, right? So really the focus of the deck was trying to maximize these. It was a Madness deck in the pure sense, right? We're trying to maximize cards with the word Madness on them. And those cards just aren't at the required power level for this sort of cube, you know? Like, Reckless Worm, I'm sorry to say it, Reckless Worm, not that good of a card. Like...
Yeah, I know, don't worry. There's a Spider-Man one we can run now instead.
Yeah, and it's sort of defensible if you... like the scenario where you have like a Rummager in play, say, so you're like kind of getting a card out of a Madness, you're getting the instant speed, yada, yada, yada. Like, then it sort of feels okay in this sort of cube. But when they just kill your Rummager, it's horrendous. And it's like you're building around something, but the thing you get when you built around it is just an on-par power level, right? And when that gets disrupted in any way, you just have a dead card. I think... So Madness was in a really tough place for a really long time. I think we're now in a place where we could start sprinkling bits back in, because the discard matters stuff is good, like inherently good without Madness cards. You can kind of free roll a few of them, like some of the best ones, like some Lizards maybe, and some of the newer guys, and the Anya's Ravager I quite like.
Oh yeah, that one's great.
That's the that's the 3/3 when it attacks, discard your hand and draw 3 cards. That card's pretty strong. But yeah, in the environment we had at the time, these cards were not really playable. The only time it felt okay was with exactly Survival of the Fittest, because Survival of the Fittest is a powerful card, is hard to kill because it's an enchantment, and that you could get something going, but only essentially having one enabler that's acceptable. Like Fauna Shaman, not the same thing. I hate to say it.
Yeah, I do agree. Like the only way this deck was winning was when you constructed a board state that involves Survival of the Fittest and going Root Waller into cheating Avengewine into play on like turn 3. And that was how it could pick up. But if you didn't have exactly that, you were in a lot of trouble. And also remember as well with this, like the mana in this deck being dreadful. Like this was aimed to be an aggro deck that needed all 3 pips of mana on turn 3 and is also running a Bazaar of Baghdad. And like, I think what this kind of highlights is like this was a time where, to an extent, I was just like, or with the Madness deck, just kind of throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what stuck. Because like in the next update around this time, we cut a bunch of the Madness stuff, but then we add in all the dredgers. Like Bazaar came in when the Madness stuff came out, which feels very, in hindsight, very wrong to me. And like, I feel I'm definitely better at building cubes now, trust me. But like Stinkweed Imp, Golgari, Grave Troll, all these kind of stuff, these came in, and it, like, we did an episode on how to fix Golgari recently, but this feels very much like a deck we spoke about, and that we're kind of like, we're just playing some good cards and going like, oh, here's the graveyard deck, see what you can build with it. But that doesn't really work. Like, James, would you agree that kind of like it feels like it's not really focused, it doesn't really have like a direction, as it were? Yeah,
I would agree. You titled this episode Roasting Your Cubes, so I'm not going to hold back. I think this is the most inexplicable decision I could see in the list, because Normally when the build aroundy stuff doesn't get there, it's like the reason it doesn't get there is you need lots of different specific pieces and it's hard to get them to all line up. And like there's something there that could work, but it just works so rarely that it's not worth having in. It's not worth having the slots. I don't think that's really true with this stuff. I think I'm not sure you can construct me a deck from this card pool where Stinkweed Imp is a good card, you know? I don't know that deck exists.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a blocker, James, with Death Touch.
That is true. Yeah.
Like, that's how most games with it end up playing. Like,
yeah, because the thing is, right, the payoff is just basically only Hogak.
Yeah.
There's no point to any of these other cards if you don't have the Hogak. And also, sometimes they just exile your Hogak and then your deck doesn't do anything. And sometimes the Hogak's like near the bottom of your deck and then the deck doesn't do anything. And the reality is, like, just a Hogak is not enough to get it done in most games of Cube, you know? Like, people are doing powerful stuff. This isn't Modern where you have it on turn 2 every game. And you can't make it be that, right? The cards don't exist to have that level of consistency. So I don't think there's a scenario where this stuff works. Yeah, it seems a bit tough. I think if you want to do the really stock your graveyard thing, it needs to be in a way lower power level cube, and you need a lot more payoffs for it. And a lot more stuff that like inherently does something from the graveyard, you know? Like, not stuff you have to draw and then pay off for having a stock graveyard, stuff where you mill it over and it just does something by itself, you know? And we don't have any of that. We really just have a Hogak and a Dream.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Like in the latest version of my cube, like there's still Hogak, but like it's kind of leans a little bit more into the Delirium side of things, if I'm honest, and like also with some discard synergies as well. I'm just way more happier with it. Like you have cards like Ursine Monstrosity, which are phenomenal, which like isn't technically a Tarmogoyf, but it's a better Tarmogoyf in modern day Magic, which I like, along with like Barrogoyf and Pyrogoyf, which are probably at the upper end power level wise in my cube and are ones that I'll have to keep an eye on. But like that kind of Delirium, different stuff in graveyard deck, I'm definitely more happier with now. Because it just like naturally gets more value from discard cards. Like you have cards like Inti, which is like a really good aggressive card that like happens to put stuff into the graveyard. You're gaining value with it. That's all really nice. It's helping you go through your deck. It's triggering your Delirium. That's all really good. And I feel we've just had more time to focus in on kind of like that deck and how things synergize together. Whereas kind of like at this time, it was like, yeah, throw some Dredgers in. Dredgers are powerful. Let's see how they go. But like, being honest, I don't think Dredge, like any card with Dredge, really has a place in any kind of in any kind of high-powered cube. But I guess kind of transitioning from like a pet deck of mine that like didn't work at the time to a pet deck of mine that really worked at the time. The closest update to our first podcast is when the Artifact Aggro deck came in its like full pomp and entirety. This is when Scorpeth Lord was added, James. We love it. Like around this time,
Nice.
Yeah, we were adding cards like Phyrexian Dragon Engine and like really cheap, aggressive artifact creatures, along with actually like quite pushed artifact cards like Lodestone Golem, really powerful card in this, but also cards like Mishra's Workshop that also came in around this time. And like the first cube after we started the podcast with all these changes was one by Artifact Aggro deck that was running some cool that was running like a bunch of the cool aggressive creatures, but was also running like a Goblin Welder package with the Portal to Phyrexia, but also running cards like Mishra's Workshop and Tolarian Academy. And that was really scary. Like, James, what did you think of the deck at the time?
Yeah, I remember being a skeptic of the time of our good friend the Scorpeth Lord and all his Necron buddies. And I think I was 100% proved wrong, actually. This all came together shockingly well. I think for anyone who was coming into it from having played a bunch of like Powered Cube and stuff, there was a bit of a predisposition of like the best thing to do with the broken mana stuff like Academy, like Workshop, is to pair it with blue cards and draw lots of cards and go really ham, make loads of mana, untap your academy, yada yada yada, play some draw 7s. And we all had to adjust to the fact that actually in this cube, in this environment, beating down was really good with our workshops and whatnot. Scorp of Lord, shockingly effective Magic card, it turns out. It's really quite distressing. Stuff like, even like the stupid Psychomancer and the Scrap Heap Scroungers of the world, it all just came together because it came out so quickly. The mana was so powerful. Yeah, I think you could very happily first pick a Mishra's Workshop in this cube and go pretty ham, you know?
Yeah, during this time especially, like I really I loved this deck at the time. I still love it today. Like I did have to like power it down when I started removing some of like the Modern Horizons 3 cards. So like Academy is still in, but the Workshop kind of had to come out. It was a bit too free. Like only that deck got that card basically. And like from a balancing point of view, giving one deck a Mox was a bit too much. But yeah, love this deck. It was awesome. Like I really need to build like the Canadian Highlander version of this deck at some point because yeah, I think that would be awesome. But let's transition over to something that didn't work as well. This is probably, at this period of time, I feel it was definitely like the last like valiant stand for Birthing Pod. This was the last time that Pod appeared in my cube, and I gave it one last push before I ended up cutting it. Around this time, we were also testing cards like Prime Speaker Vanifar. That's a creature version of Birthing Pod, as well as there's also a Planeswalker pod in. And I was also running some creatures that untap when they come in, cards like Bounding Krasis, so that in theory you could like build a pod chain and go up the chain pretty easily if you got the pieces together. I think it's fair to say, James, this did not work. It's something I wanted to test, and it's something I was pushing just because Birthing Pod is like one of them, for our playgroup anyway, like a super nostalgia-driven card. It's really popular, but just, I think I can see that it didn't work. Like, would you agree with that, James?
Yes, I think that is reasonable to say. I think looking at the list I'm looking at, which is, I think from, just before we started the podcast, it's, I think you said the Persist combos had just come out, and I think the Birthing Pod probably needed to go with them.
Yeah.
It makes sense as an inclusion if you're trying to push that combo stuff, but the whole idea of like I have a pod chain and I untap my pod is not really something that works in cube, because you just need, first you need too many cards. You need to open the precise cards to assemble that whole chain, and it puts too much pressure on, stuff just isn't opened in the draft and you don't see it and yada yada yada. This isn't constructed. We don't have a perfect chain. And also, because in constructed, right, you have 4 birthing pods and then one of all of the targets, which are like good to fetch but bad to draw. Whereas in a limited deck, we have 40 cards, we have 1 birthing pod and one of all of the targets, which are bad to draw. And then you just end up playing with the bad creatures more of the time than you end up playing with the birthing pod. I do still believe Birthing Pod like has a place in some cubes, but it needs to be, it's not about a chain, it's about assembling a combo, and if I have this creature and play at the same time, then I just win, and the Birthing Pod is the way I put that together. And even then it's, it's kind of tough and it doesn't belong in the same cube as White Plume Adventurer. So yeah, I would not be, much as I love Birthing Pod, I would not be taking it highly in this list.
Yeah, no, I think that's very fair. I think in hindsight, it's like, to actually make Birthing Pod work, the solution is not to add a bunch of bad, worse Birthing Pods. It's to like make an environment where you can do mid-range grindy stuff. Like, Pod does not work in a cube with the initiative. Like, what are we going to do? Like, pod away our White Plume Adventurer to get our Seasoned Dungeoneer. Like, let's just keep the White Plume Adventure in play. Like, that seems good enough.
Yeah, it seems like kind of a tough way to do it. I feel like if we have a White Plume Adventure and a Seasoned Dungeoneer, then we were doing okay anyway without Birthing Pod,
Yeah, I do. I still love Birthing Pod. Like, I need to finish off my modern bordered cube. I think Pod will actually be quite solid there. But let's keep it going, James. There's a couple of other packages and decks I want to get through. Next up was one that I was always a big fan of, and again, just struggled to make it work, I think, in this power level. And that was like a top of the deck matters style of deck. Like, it was. This is one I do think could have a place in like a lower powered or a more budget cube. Basically, what it's trying to do is use cards that can control the top of your library, things like Scroll Rack, things like Sensei's Divining Top, things like Jace the Mind Sculptor or Brainstorm, and then combine them with either cards that are good on the top of your library, cards like spells with Miracle, things like Triumph of St. Catherine, which is a cool Warhammer creature, cards like Entreat the Angels or Temporal Mastery. These are other cool cards with Miracle. Or cards that reward you for having something good on top of your library. Cards like Vesuvian Drifter, which becomes a copy of a creature on top of your library. Or a card like God Eternal Kefnet, which lets you cast a copy of a spell that was on top of your library, and you can kind of do some cool infinite turn combos with that card. This like top of the deck matters type of thing. Like Miracles was a deck in Legacy for quite a while, and they are quite powerful spells, but like in my power level of cube, like this also just didn't get there. What did you think of this deck, James?
Yeah, Vesuvian Drifter seems a little bit tough. Entreat the Angel seems a little bit tough. The main thing that confuses me is we have all these like kind of medium ways to set it up. We don't have like a Vampiric Tutor, and we don't have an Imperial Seal. And these are like so much more like reliable ways of setting this stuff up than a Sensei's Divining Top and whatnot, you know?
Yeah, I think for me, where I drew the line in power level was also tutors. There are very few tutors in this.
Okay, right. I think that makes this a little bit tricky, to be honest. Because that's where this stuff, I think, can actually be good, the Triumph of St. Catherine. Like, obviously, we didn't have it, I think, when this came about, but the card that's a great payoff now is the Metamorphosis Fanatic, right? The
oh yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I like that one.
Due to reanimates and puts lifelink counters on stuff, and also as a big lifelinker, and it miracles for 2 mana. Because a lot of these are just like a bit tough to make it worth a payoff. Like, yeah, Temporal Mastery is powerful, but it's so bad when you just draw it and you don't miracle it. And similar with Entreat the Angels, really. And it's still like kind of a lot of mana, and you need to have it come up at the right time. Whereas if you have those good flexible top deck tutors, like they're good cards anyway, you're not sort of paying a cost by including them in the cube. You're not just including them for this deck, and but they are going to make this deck sing, I think, in a way that seems quite tricky to do as it is.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think the tutors would push it over the edge, but I think that kind of leaves this archetype in a really tricky place because, like, in cubes that have tutors, they don't need to run miracle cards because, like shortly after this was tested in my cube, like, you don't need to run Entreat the Angels because, like, 4th Aeolingus exists, which is just a better version. You don't need to worry about miracling in, and then like if you're in a powered cube as well that's running the tutors. You don't need to run cards like Temporal Mastery to get an extra turn because like Time Walk just exists in that cube. So maybe this is just an archetype that's always going to struggle in cube, basically. Like, I could see a world where maybe like that it could be like a little package because like I do think cards like Sensei's Divining Top and like Jace the Mind Sculptor are like they're just solid cards that can go in more of a wide range of cubes. So maybe you kind of ignore the miracle stuff and kind of just have the God Eternal Kefnet infinite turn combo stuff as a nice little package. That could be quite fun. I do quite like that. Like God Eternal Kefnet is like a 4-mana 4/5 flyer that has an ability. You may reveal the first card you draw each turn. As you draw it, whenever you reveal an instant or sorcery card this way, copy that card and you may cast the copy. That copy costs 2 generic list to cast. So basically, if it's an extra turn spell on top of your library, you draw it, you can cast a copy of it. If you have a way of putting that extra turn spell back on top of your library, like with Scroll Rack or Jace the Mind Sculptor, then you effectively get infinite turns. And I think that is quite fun. But yeah, that could be one for a lower powered level cube. Not for Vintage Cube, obviously, but like, yeah, for lower powered level cube, it is a cool thing to do. And maybe that's as far as that package goes now. And I think as well, looking back on it, I think at the time, like, because I could kind of see that creature decks were getting quite strong, like with Initiative, that they were putting up a lot of numbers. I think I was kind of thinking at the time, like, to balance it out, I need to add more combos. I need to add more different things to do to kind of fight against that. But kind of like what we've seen in things like the Mitgo Vintage Cube or the Arena Powered Cube is like the way they're dealing with like creatures being more powerful is they're just adding more answers to those creatures. They're adding more removal and bits of interaction. They're not adding bad combos, which is kind of what I was doing at the time.
Yeah, for sure. I think this cube is slightly light on removal compared to where we'd be now. Because the other thing that does is it actually gives the combo decks some extra points because the combo decks get to play the removal and slow down the aggressive decks. But also, when the combo decks run into more interactive decks, the interactive decks have bad cards against them because the removal isn't good against the combo decks, and the combo decks kind of get a little bit of free equity there. And that gives you the time to do some of the slower combo stuff. Like, we don't have, for example, a Doomsday in this cube. I think that would have been interesting as a way to go for combo rather than this stuff. Or, we don't have we have the Breach stuff, but we don't have another Storm deck, right?
Yeah, I think you've highlighted a really good point there. Yeah, the combo decks in at this time were all creature-based. So they're not getting that kind of free equity and not running creatures. So yeah, I completely agree. Something like a Doomsday, which has come in subsequently, I think would have been perfect for this kind of era of Cube. But yeah, like that's the thing. Like again, from a timeline point of view, yeah, we've just cut persist combos, but like we're only probably about 6 months out from like Kiki Jiki Splinter Twin finally coming out to my cube because like people really liked it and people were drafting it, but like it was like going like 0-3 or like 1-2 for like a good 6 months to a year before I finally cut it.
Yeah, I mean the Splinter Twin stuff is good vibes, but it's a bit tough to make it work now. And the other combo stuff we have in seems so. For example, we have a Sneak Attack, which is the sort of combo thing that can work and is good enough. But some of the support we would want, I think, isn't quite there. Like we don't have 15 mana Emrakul. We don't have stuff like Worldspine Worm. We don't have... Also, I think quite importantly, we don't have a Through the Breach. So we don't have the redundancy. And especially in a world where we don't have good tutors for it, we're kind of in a spot where we're just hoping to draw the sneak quite a lot. So really, the only place you can really end up playing it is like a kind of backdoor into a Reanimator deck. Which seems a little bit tough because we also, I think we don't have Flash, right?
No, we don't. Kind of like the other alternative payoffs for Sneak Attack is like in this cube right now is Show and Tell. I think we're about 6 months off of Flash coming in, and you also kind of see that in the like big green top end. Kind of like we're still running like a card like Titan of Industry and like Craterhoof. Whereas, like, once Flash comes in, we start transferring over to Woodfall Primus and Worldspine Worm. Kind of like I feel that, like, as a cube community, that's kind of where the big top ends have kind of settled on now because there are these effects that work with Flash, they work with Sneak Attack, they work with like all the ways you want to cheat them into play.
Yeah, it checks out.
But yeah, some other combos I was testing at the time. I think it's worth talking about now. At the time I was that beside the podcast, I had Spike Feeder and Archangel of Thune in. This is like an infinite. That's like a nice infinite life combo. And then also I was trying Sahili Rai and Felidar Guardian for making infinite cats, that kind of stuff. And yeah, it's weird with these cards because they're not really like a package. It's just kind of just two cards existing apropos of nothing. And like, yeah, these didn't really come off. Like these don't really have a shell. Yeah, when there's no, like, I can see back now, no tutors makes these two card combos really hard. It's also a 540 cube, so like you're not opening a third of the cube in most drafts. Therefore, these aren't going to appear anywhere near as regularly. Like, and I feel that looking back on this cube, I can feel that this is one of the main areas where I can see myself growing as a cube designer. Like, I feel I put these cards in at the time because, like, they're powerful, or, like, I thought they were powerful. They didn't really have a reason. They didn't really go in a deck. They weren't really working with anything else in the cube. Like, I definitely feel nowadays if I add something to my cube there's a much better reason behind it than like, oh, I've heard this is powerful, let's just throw it in.
Yeah, for sure. Good. That's good growth, I guess. Yeah, I think the stuff like the Spike Feeder combo, I kind of feel like if you're doing creature combos, you kind of need to do all of it or none of it. And it's like we still have stuff like, for example, Eldritch Evolution in here. Like, what the hell am I meant to Eldritch Evolution into, you know?
I think in my head at the time that it was another copy of Birthing Pod. Like, like mistakes were made, James. Mistakes were made.
Yeah. Exactly. But it's kind of just the Spike Feeder thing, right? Like, there's not enough combo stuff that I can take the Eldritch Evolution and be like, oh, I'll find like something cool to set up with this. And yeah, the Feldar Guardian thing is just kind of a worse Splinter Twin, really, because A, you don't have redundancy, and B, none of the pieces have flash. Like, the thing that made Splinter Twin powerful is that you can die at any time, right? Like, they can go end step, Pestamite, untap, kill you. Whereas the Feldar Guardian doesn't do that, right? You generally have to untap with one part of the combo. Which is inherently makes it just a lot easier to play against.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's just, very easy to interact with. Yeah, I completely, As I said, mistakes were made, James. Mistakes were made. There was something else I noticed, though, that when I was looking at this list, and, like, there's one dead giveaway that this list is from, like, the early 2020s, and that's that it still has a full cycle of talismans in it. Like, when we got the full cycle of talismans, the conversation was, oh, sweet. We now are obviously going to replace all of our signets with talismans. We want a full cycle, that's great. But as kind of time's gone on, like, I've definitely cut, like, I haven't run a full cycle of talismans in quite a while. Now it's just my color pairs that care about artifacts, they get talismans, nothing else does. Like what does Gruul need a talisman for in my cube? It doesn't want that. It wants some kind of cool payoff. And I think this is something that generally, as like a cube community, we've all kind of settled on. Like I'm assuming that like the Mitgo Vintage Cube and like the Arena Power Cube don't have full cycles of talismans anymore, James.
Yeah, for sure they don't. And I think a lot of the reason for that, right, is especially the green decks don't really want the talismans a lot of the time. Like, if you want to ramp on 2 mana in green in this cube, I'm looking, you've got an Armored Scrap Gorger, a Biophagus, a Lotus Cobra. There's plenty of options. There's a bunch of the 1 mana elves. You're not going to use a talisman for that job. So what the green-red talisman, for example, is not for the green-red deck. It's a worse talisman for the blue-red artifact deck, you know? So cut that talisman, and if you want another 2 mana rock for the artifact deck, put in like a Mind Stone or whatever instead, right? You don't need a red-green talisman because it's not going to be played in the red-green deck. Yeah, I did like that you were on talismans over signets though, like before a lot of the other cubes were, because signets were also just a bit annoying, you know? Like, I've seen so many times people, like, screw up how they tap their mana and leave themselves unable to cast their spell because talismans work in a slightly odd way with the filtering. But, yeah, I think talismans are good, but we don't need all of them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think as a cube community, that's kind of where we've all settled on as well. But one other big change to mana that I didn't realize it was around the start of this podcast that when I made it, was that I added double fetch lands to my cube. So originally I had single fetch lands. Double fetch lands meant I had 2 of every fetch lands in my cube. And I've only just taken this out. Like, I had this in for 3 years, and it made fixing really, really good, especially with triomes. And like, it only got better when they added surveil lands because there were more fetchable lands that had like more awesome utility. And like, with the double fetch lands, there's just so many targets, and like, and yeah, I think it just made so many decks so much more efficient. And like, this oddly actually might be one of the reasons why the initiative was so strong in my cube, because effectively like the Naya soup deck just became like the best thing that you could do for such a long time. Like, it had perfect mana, and like 3 months after we started the podcast, you also got access to things like 4th Aerlingus on top of things like all initiative creatures on top of Comet Stellar Pup, on top of Minsk and Boo. Like, it being a 3-color deck was not a drawback at all. Like, part of me does wonder, would those decks have been so as egregious if they didn't have perfect mana, like, for all games, which they got from double fetch lands? Because, like, those decks are very splashable. They're very easy to put together. Like, James, like, what do you remember about when I first introduced double fetch lands into my cube?
Yeah, I can understand the logic for adding it, but I think there was a long time where, because we had these big power allies, and also most of them are really splashable, right? Like, the initiative creatures are almost all single pip, yeah. Like, if I open, Seasoned Dungeoneer in pack 2 of this cube, there's very few situations where I'm not taking it, right? Because, it doesn't actually matter if I'm a Dimir deck or Vaclair deck or whatever. I'm going to be able to splash it because the fixing's that good. Like, the fetches are often going to be 5-color lands, often, like, untapped. And no, I think that's good. I think it's good to have, like, 5-color options, but you should have to work for it. And I think it felt a little bit too free for a while, especially when we got triumphs. Yeah, similar with for Failingus and stuff. Like, it just doesn't matter what colors I'm in. I'm gonna take it and I'm gonna make it work. I think that's not a super healthy position because it means that it kind of devalues some of the more synergy-based decks where actually what's more important is to position yourself to just be able to take super powerful cards and play those instead. But you don't have to work for as much.
Yeah, and I think as well, like, I think this kind of comes back into something that I said earlier, is that I feel like I added double fetch lands, not because I had a reason to, but because I thought it would be good and powerful. Like back then, I wasn't even really pushing landfall that much. Like now, oddly, I've got cards like Tifa Lockhart, like Scythecat Cub and Bristly Bill. These are cards that want lands, like, to come into place. But I think what testing them for that amount of time like made me realize is that kind of like double fetch lands doesn't, like, it will help the decks that you intend them for. Like, it'll help the landfall decks. But realistically, what it's doing is it's just helping, like, the most efficient decks. Like it's not a thing of, like, oh, if I add double fetch lands, everyone has perfect mana. What it kind of means more is that kind of, like, it, like, makes the good cards better because they're easier for people to splash and cast. And it kind of, like, warps the format around getting these good cards and being able to play them rather than building, like, a synergistic deck.
Yes, yeah, for sure. And I think there were drafts where it just felt like a lot of the decks were quite soupy and we weren't really playing distinct archetypes against each other. We were playing, look at the powerful cards I drafted and the powerful cards you drafted. Who's the more powerful, Yeah,
exactly. And kind of like when we're in this world, we're kind of like, there are these different power outliers. Because, like, at the time, like, we knew the initiative was powerful, but we didn't really realize, like, how powerful. Like, it hadn't been banned in most formats at the time we were playing with it.
Yeah, for sure. And, like, credit to, like, it wasn't like the state of the cube for ages and ages. Like, definitely fixed it, but it was, I think it was in a weird spot for a while.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. Like, I think as well, like, because we were quite early on the initiative train, it meant that it was around for quite a bit longer than it maybe would have been. Like, I'll thank my wife for that one, actually. Like, she was casting some initiative creatures off of Ancient Tombs in Legacy and, like, smushing face in some high-profile tournaments, and, like, yeah, she really got me on to, like, how good they really were. But yeah, no, we definitely went to ham. Like, I remember making videos at the time being like, the best thing you can do in Cube is play, like, 8 initiative cards in your cube. It's definitely fine. Like, in hindsight, like, that seems a little bit too much. Like yeah, and it's safe to say we've learned where initiative belongs in Cube, and it's not in, like, unpowered environments.
Yeah, it seems like a tough way to do it.
So I think, like, actually, like, one question I want to ask you, James, before we get everyone out of here is kind of like, are there any of these packages that, like, personally you would like to see back and try it again? Like, can I interest you, James, in an attraction package in 2026, maybe?
You cannot, I'm afraid. No, I think a lot of the stuff that I think worked really well in this cube is still there. Like the artifact aggro stuff, I think, is great, and was a bunch of cards I'd never played with before you put them in your cube, and I think that's really cool. It also combined quite nicely with the like Goblin Welder Trash for Treasure stuff, which I think in so many cubes is a bit of a trap. Like, I've seen so many cubes try and do that, and it hasn't worked, and I think in this cube it does, and that's really cool. What other stuff do I like to come back? I mean, I'd like Opposition to come back, because Opposition's dope and should be in all cubes, but maybe I need to win 5 more for that to happen. And then I think the other thing that's kind of interesting is, we've talked about how the Madness cards are bad, but I think we can now sprinkle a few of them back in. I think Anya's Ravager, it's the time to shine is now, you know? In 2023, it wasn't there, but 2026, it's Anya's Ravager's world, you know?
Yeah, I'm definitely way more happy with that deck than I am at the time. Like, I remember drafting it like back in 2023 and like having to draft a Jund mana base, hoping it would all come together in like one game in like 6 or 9. I'd get in with Avenge Rhine, and then the rest of it I just like fail to curve out or lose to a Comet Stellar Pup or like an initiative creature, and it just wouldn't come together. But yeah, I'm way happier with it now.
Yeah, for real. The other one I think is really cool. I don't know if I don't remember it ever working super well, but I think it's a dope card and I always want to try it, is Winota.
Oh, yeah. Actually, yeah, you know what? I actually have a memory of that one actually being quite good. Like, specifically when there was so many humans, like when I got really caught up with the human package, like effectively, like all of our Rabble Masters were non-humans that made tokens, and then the rest of it was like a humans deck. So that's kind of like how you did it. Like, I know like the tokens, the first time you attack with them don't trigger Winota, but like the second time they do. So I remember that actually being quite solid at the time. Like, and I think a bunch of the initiative creatures are also human as well, for what that's worth.
Oh, God, yeah, we don't need more ways to find them, do we? Jesus Christ. Yeah, I have it in my Dual Commander cube at the moment. I'm sure someone's going to do something absolutely heinous with it at some stage. And
yeah, having it in the command zone. Yeah, I think there it could slap, actually. Yeah, that actually seems quite good. Like, it's also a nice deck building constraint. Like, you have to kind of balance it to make it work, and that is, yeah, I think that is quite nice.
Yeah, and it has the interesting tension, right, that it wants you to have cheap non-humans and expensive humans, and the cards in Magic have lots of cheap humans and expensive non-humans. So it gives you a little bit of it gives you some work to do in that sense, which is cool.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that's one to test the future. Like, I know at the time we had it with, I think Agent of Treachery. That one's quite good. That's the one that it comes in and gains control of like a permanent and opponent controls. So that one's pretty good. Like,
yeah, that's gross. I think that was a constructed thing at one stage, right?
Yeah, I have a feeling either Agent of Treachery or Winota was banned in standard for that combination.
That checks out. Yeah, that doesn't sound that fun.
No, exactly. Yeah, no, I think that's where we're going to do it for today. James, pleasure, man. Nice little walk down memory lane.
Yeah. Always a pleasure.
And also, probably worth saying, James, yeah, thank you for doing 100 episodes with me. When we started it, I don't think we really had any long-term plans, but I think it's fair to say, James, yeah, it's been a lot of fun. And yeah, I've really enjoyed it. Yeah,
no, it's been a lot of fun. And yeah, to 100 more, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, also it just leads me to thank you, dear listener, for listening. And no matter how long you've been with us, if you've been here from episode 1, or if this is your first episode, thank you very much for listening. We greatly appreciate you all. It's always been nice over the years seeing like the comments and all the great feedback. Yeah, this is a great community, and we greatly appreciate you. Yeah, until next time, it's goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from James. You've been listening to Powerful Nothing. We'll see you all soon. Goodbye.